On this video we're going to look at the throttle body and how to check the setup of it. People may have tampered over the years with the settings of the throttle body, and it can give perhaps some hesitation when you drive or a bad idle. And there's not really many things to check, but you know, often people are trying to find a fault with the running of the car or the idle, and they will typically do the usual: change the spark plugs, change the spark plug leads, check the timing, but a lot of the time they're just looking at the wrong things. The throttle body is quite critical, in particular the throttle position sensor that will tell the computer, of course, what position the throttle is in, so it knows what to do with the fuel and the timing. I've got quite a few throttle bodies. Some are good, some are not so good. Just collect them over the years, really. It's the sort of part you don't want to throw away, but I think I've probably got about 6 or 7 of them. I've also printed off give it time to focus, but it's not. This is printed out from the troubleshooting manual, which is available on my website to download. Now, if you do need to adjust the sensor, this is how you can do it with a multimeter to check the resistance. So we'll have a quick look at that. I'll tell you how to do it. Right. Now, you may come across 2 different types of throttle body. They're essentially the same. If you have a engine that's from an import car or from a European country that has a catalytic converter, you'll have a throttle body with one of these outlets on the top. That's not needed on the UK cars where there's no catalyst. So if you do have a throttle body that looks like this can be blanked off. You don't need this. There's usually a hose that goes to it, that goes to the charcoal canister. So ensure that's blocked off for the majority of people, well, for the UK people. I don't know how, I've probably got 3 or 4 of these catalyst throttle bodies. They seem to be in better condition normally. So there's a non-catalyst one. You see, it is the same item, just without the outlet on the top. Here is where the throttle position sensor fits. There is also I've already removed it. So you've got your bracket there for the throttle cable, and then this is what they call the damper pot. You can adjust the position of this as well, but that's something to do right at the very end. Don't fiddle with these. Well, don't fiddle with the adjustment for this until you're satisfied with everything else. Okay, now let's pick up a good one. Not that one. Okay. Now you can do, all I'm going to show you here can be done on the car, so you don't have to take the throttle body off. But if you're fiddling around for a while, you know, you might get backache, bending over the back of the engine. If you do take it off, you are going to disturb that gasket. So I think it's certainly doable on the car most of the time. Now, the first thing I would always check if you suspect the throttle body is adjusted badly is if it's been tampered with before. Now, in the factory, what they do is they put a dab of yellow paint on the screws, or sometimes just one. So if that's ever been turned or moved by someone to adjust, then the yellow paint is going to be broken, the paint mark. This one, to me, looks like it's never been touched. So if the throttle body hasn't been fiddled with, leave it. No need to touch it. The next thing to look at is if the throttle stop has been tampered with. This one's still got the can on. Let's go back to the other one. Now this is the throttle stop here. It has a lock nut on there. So you just slacken the lock nut and then you can adjust the throttle stop. Now again, they dab a bit of a yellow paint on that. And if you can see it's been tampered with and the sensor hasn't been adjusted, then this is what you can look at to start with. Check that the throttle stop is correct. Now the way to do that is once you've slackened off the lock nut, you don't need to remove it, just slacken it, and then a small Allen key, and you can turn this stop screw. So this will determine the resting place of the throttle. The flap inside is deliberately made very slightly larger than the hole. So when the throttle is completely closed, you've got a perfect seal. But the butterfly flap, it would be resting on the wall of the throttle body. Now that's not very desirable because over time it would wear a step because of the contact that's being made. So the position for the throttle to be resting in is almost touching but not quite. And the factory position, what you've got to do, wind this out plenty. Let's see if that's enough. I think so. So now the throttle stop, the lever here, is not touching the screw at all on the back here. It's not going to be easy to show you these things in the camera perhaps. But that now is resting on the neck of the throttle body. Now what you do is you wind it back in, and just to the point no, I don't think you'll be able to see the fine detail. Trouble is, if I hold the camera, there'll be so much shake. So I've mounted it on a little stand. Anyway, so you wind this back in until it just makes contact with the arm, which is there, and then This is the sort of factory, how they set it up, if you like. And then, so it's just made contact. You turn it then half a turn, between half and 3/4 of a turn. So that's half a turn, just go a tiny bit past half. And that's it. And then you pop your, or tighten up your lock nut again to stop it from moving. So that's now the throttle stop adjusted. Just that half a turn or so stops the flap from resting on the wall of the neck. Another thing to mention is I've seen people often adjust that thinking it's for the idle speed, but it's not. The idle speed, if you don't know, is this big screw here. That adjusts your idle speed. There should be a rubber bung that covers the hole normally. They often go missing. So if the throttle position sensor hasn't been adjusted before, best not to touch it, and check the stop is good, like I just did. With a multimeter, using the diagram I showed you earlier, then you can actually adjust the throttle stop, checking the resistance of the sensor until it conforms to the specification. So what you can see here on the back with the sensor removed is how it turns with just a small amount of, that's how it, there's a sensor here that this fits on, this part rotates. So really it's just determining if it's the throttle position sensor that's been fiddled with, or if it's the throttle stop screw that's been fiddled with, or both. If they've both been fiddled with, or we want to start again from scratch, start with the calibration of this stop nut like I just showed. Get this on. A bit fiddly just to get it in place. Okay, so that's on there now. And another thing to tell you as well, the screws are not very, this doesn't focus right. The screws are quite tight, and if you've got a poorly fitting screwdriver, then you'll struggle to get them off, or to get them loose. They're quite often mangled as well from other people's attempts, so I quite often change these to like an Allen head type little bolt. But yes, to adjust the throttle position sensor, it's just a case of using your multimeter, and the most important value to look at is between 1 and 2 on the contacts there. 15 to 35 ohms is what it should read. That's the one to set it up with when you're in a resting position. If that's correct, all the others should be correct, unless it's a faulty sensor. But in terms of calibrating and getting the sensor in the correct position, you want to be looking at this one here. It's quite a sensitive adjustment. Once you've tightened it back up again, check again, because even just tightening the screws, it can move it and just enough to affect this reading. Note as well that this is ohms. The other readings are k ohms, so a different setting on your multimeter. Grab this one again. Another fault that can occur is the idle speed doesn't stay steady, and you get this what they call hunting, where it goes up and down, doesn't stay nice and steady. There can be a few reasons why on the car, on the engine, but something it can be is the cold start sort of choke mechanism here, and water or coolant is pumped through the bottom of the throttle body, pipe in, pipe out, and inside is a wax valve that responds to the heat as the engine warms up, and that valve moves, and inside here we have some holes in the neck, and that's the air bypass system that's also linked to the idle speed screw. And if this wax valve inside seizes up, which they sometimes do, then as the engine warms up, it doesn't move. There's too much airflow through the throttle body, and it will cause the engine speed to hunt up and down. Now, if it is faulty, there's not much you can do because it's sealed inside. You can test by, again, the lighting's not there, you can just about see it. What you can do then, with the engine running, have this hose off that fits on here, the boost hose, and simply put your finger over the hole. If that dramatically drops the idle speed, and the idle becomes steady, then the fault could be to do with this wax valve inside. It's like a plunger and a wax. I did take one apart one day. I had to sort of grind it open to have a look. So apart from there's nothing you can really do if they are faulty apart from fit another throttle body and try again. But if in the first instance, if the idle speed is too high, it will cause the hunting. So you can try adjusting the idle speed down by screw the idle speed, the screw downwards. And with this damper pot that fits on with the throttle cable like that. So all this is designed to do is when you take your foot off the pedal quick, and typically in a scenario where you're coming up to a junction, you're on the brake, you put your clutch down so you don't stall, and then the engine speed will drop quickly, and this is to try and catch it. Dampens the throttle stop, so the idle, you're less likely the engine to stall if it's got just a bit of dampening on that stop. And with this, all you do once is to check that as your throttle closes, it starts to push this back, and you don't want it to be, you want to make sure the throttle has hit the stop before this is at its limit, so the throttle can definitely reach the stop point properly. But you can adjust, how early this starts to make contact. So the last few hundred RPM will fall slower depending on they call it the dash pot, I think. But that's all that does. I'm not sure what else I need to show you with that. You can normally tell if there's any chance of the throttle body being any good. Quite a good clue is the condition of the water connections here, for the coolant connections. If they're very clean, nice looking, that's a good sign. You know, it means that the car's had good clean cooling system with not full of rusty water like this one.